This is Breaking News Edition. I'm Benita Levine, live in Tel Aviv. Thank you very much for joining us. A new phase for the Israeli Air Force as it intensifies its attacks on Iran, striking fuel depots near Tehran and other key sites. Day 9 of the joint US-Israeli operations against the Islamic regime. Bahrain saying an Iranian attack had damaged one of its desalination plants, signaling a widening assault on vital infrastructure across the region. Iran's retaliatory strikes against Gulf nations continued on Sunday, despite President Masoud Pezeshkian's apology for previous attacks on the oil-rich kingdoms. Half an hour after that highly unusual apology on Saturday, the attacks resumed. On the leadership front, Tehran is moving closer to officially announcing a new supreme leader following the elimination of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei in the opening salvo of the operations on day 1. A senior Iranian cleric involved in the vote indicating the supreme leader's son Mojtaba would be his successor. 56-year-old Mojtaba Khamenei is a hardline cleric like his father. This position, when confirmed, would give him the final say in all matters of state in the Islamic Republic. And so for more, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangat, former military secretary to 3 ministers of defense and the former coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories in the IDF, senior Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran, and our senior correspondent Owen Alterman. Gentlemen, so much to discuss. We are obviously going to be taking a deeper look at the son of the supreme leader, much to unpack on that front. But I want to start with developments on the ground in Tehran. Intense strikes, Eitan, targeting some significant key strategic sites. How does this change the next phase of this war?
I think it's a part for this week that it's a very, in my opinion, critical week, because among the timetable and the pressure that I think that is put on the United States and Israel, first of all, by the Gulf countries, they are under a very strong pressure, and some other countries in the world, and you know, is making Trump his calculation. Even he stated that he has some weeks to complete his mission, and he's right on the way he estimated. I think that this kind of attack that has started today and yesterday are very important in order to create more and more weakness during, if you connected all the parts of the Iranian entity and also the military parts, and creating much more destabilization concerning their chances to survive or to bring some opportunity that in some occasions the Strait will be the next coming outside in order to create a change. But one thing is clear. This week is a very strong strikes, a very strong attack, as you mentioned, also on the infrastructure, also in a depth of bunkers, headquarters, continue with the missiles, with the nuclear, and it shows that the future of the Iranian armed forces and the entity is coming towards a very weak point that will be very difficult, even with a new leader, if continues to survive or to handle the situation as it was before this war.
And yet, the Iranian attacks on Gulf nations, Ariel Osaran, continued. Many might have thought that could stop. It hasn't, still targeting civilian sites as well, much to the surprise of many. What is the latest on that front across the Middle East right now?
Right. So the Saudi forces say that they shot down 2 drones north of the capital, Riyadh. A few hours before that, there were 2 civilians who were killed when a projectile landed in a residential area, killing 2 foreign nationals. You also mentioned the Iranian drone attack on a desalination plant in Bahrain. So all the while, we see that these attacks are ongoing. And at the same time, the response, what we see right now on the screen, that is the Social Security headquarters of Kuwait in Kuwait City. There is no way that the Iranians can get away with claiming that they're targeting only U.S. military installations in the Gulf when you go after the social security headquarters of a country. This has nothing to do with the United States. This is not even a military target, even of Kuwait itself. And so we're seeing that the Islamic Republic continues to employ its terror tactics against the Gulf. But so far, we're seeing a very muted response on the part of the Gulf. There was an emergency session today of foreign ministers of the Arab League. It was via Zoom. And in it, the foreign minister of Egypt, in fact, called to establish a joint Arab defense force to counter this Iranian aggression that followed a very blatant condemnation on the part of Abul Gheit, the Director General of the Arab League. And so we're seeing, which, by the way, I should say that the condemnation from the head of the Arab League was only against the Iranian aggression, didn't even mention the U.S. attacks, Israel strikes on Iran, or the fact that they opened or that they launched this operation against Iran, which prompted its response. So we're seeing a unified stance in the Arab world, but specifically in the Gulf, against Iran, but that has not yet translated to military action against the Islamic Republic.
Oh, and your insights on exactly that, this very muted response, literally a Zoom meeting, let's discuss this, but nothing too aggressive.
Look, I think the Gulf states, from their own perspective, need to have reason to be cautious. Obviously, Israel's national security doctrine is a little bit different. We wouldn't accept 1,000 missiles and drones flown against our country, in case of the United Arab Emirates, without responding. But these countries have a different way of looking at national security. Their national security, at the end of the day, Benita, is built on their economic strength. In the UAE's case, and it's the incredible work that they've done to build up their country as a center for finance, for aviation, for tourism, and all of the rest. That's their strength, and that's ultimately what they're going to want to preserve. Israel's a small country surrounded by a lot of hostile forces. In our national security without a lot of natural cultural allies, so to speak. So it makes sense for our national security doctrine to be very aggressive. But in the case of the Gulf states, they have a different way of looking at things. And so I guess it's not surprising that they're taking such a cautious stance and putting back.
We're going to continue with this exact discussion.
One remark. I think today, maybe I will already mention it, that the UAE were the first time to attack a desalination infrastructure inside Iran. It's the first time that we see such a reaction by one of the Gulf countries. What does it mean? It means it gives time to the United States and Israel, or maybe we see a backwind that is coming to those countries towards their position towards Iran, because I felt they become very weak concerning their strongness to stand and to give the time, because we need the time to continue our mission.
Well, it has to be said, the UAE, of course, has denied that, so we have to...
We have to tread very cautiously with that report, because it has been very vehemently denied out of the United
Like Iran. Iran is attacking and then denied it. So maybe it's the same system.
Maybe.
Well, different tactics on different fronts. Again, something we're going to unpack in a very short while. But right now, let's find out what's happening on the ground. We go live to our correspondent, Baligh Sladin. He joins us from northern Israel. And incredibly sad news today, confirmation, Baligh, that 2 Israeli soldiers have been killed in battle in southern Lebanon. The incident took place near an army post just across from the Israeli border community of Manara. What details can you share at this hour?
Yes, that happened last night. Apparently, Puma armored engineering vehicle stuck in that area in the Upper Galilee, and then 2 D9s were sent to retrieve that vehicle. And as they have approached the vehicle, they were struck by anti-tank missiles from Hezbollah operatives in southern Lebanon. They were both severely wounded and were taken immediately to the hospital, where they have pronounced dead there. The Israeli army is saying that this kind of attacks, this tactic by Hezbollah, is actually occurring very frequently. Recently, in the past week, we've seen that happening at least 2 times. Just yesterday, we were talking about another incident where a number of Israeli soldiers were also severely wounded and a number also lightly wounded. And earlier in the week, something similar happened with Israeli soldiers in southern Lebanon. So Hezbollah is waiting for the soldiers, apparently, and then attacking them with the anti-tank missiles that they have. And sometimes they are also using other rockets like mortars as well. So we're seeing that Hezbollah is learning how the IDF is operating and adapting to it. And the result yesterday was 2 Israeli soldiers killed.
Balich, we're also learning that 5 top IRGC commanders have been killed in a Navy strike in Beirut, a developing situation. What is confirmed? What can you tell us on that front?
Yes, that also happened yesterday, another attack on Beirut, and this time a hotel actually was struck by the Israeli Air Force, and 5 apparently very high ranking officials from the IRGC, they were there and they were killed. The IDF just announced their names. They are not, of course, they're very famous to our ears, but definitely they have a significant role because they were helping Hezbollah coordinate their attacks with the Iranian regime and also to attack the Israeli territory. We are saying that the IRGC has a strong presence in Lebanon, and that's why apparently we've heard the Lebanese president a few days ago speaking of banning the activity of IRGC and also Hezbollah, of course, in Lebanon. But so far, the reaction to these activities have been very, very soft. Sometimes we're hearing some of the politicians speaking of even arresting Naim Qasim, but so far on the ground, nothing is happening. By the way, our sister Hebrew channel just published today an article speaking of a possibility of a directive that was given to Hezbollah operatives that once the Lebanese army tries to actually confiscate your weapons, engage with them, meaning that we're getting near even civil war, we can call it, in Lebanon. Such a thing could be very, very dangerous, of course, for the Lebanese armed forces. And that's why apparently, until now at least, we're not saying that they are acting forcefully against Hezbollah's activities against Israel.
Thank you so much. Correspondent Balich Sladin, live in northern Israel. More to come from Balich in the coming hours. Now, as the war rages on, a different battle is playing out on the streets of cities around the world. From Europe to the United States, protests have erupted both against the war and in support of it, with many in the Iranian diaspora celebrating strikes they believe could finally bring down the Islamic Republic. Alex Schloss has more in this report.
Around the world, members of the Iranian diaspora are taking to the streets, not only to protest the war, but to welcome what they see as a chance to bring down the Islamic Republic. In Berlin, close to 1,000 pro-monarchy protesters praised the US and Israeli strikes on Iran and voiced their support for the son of Iran's last Shah, Reza Pahlavi. Similar scenes played out in Italy. In Rome, about 200 people from the Iranian community waved Italian, US, and pre-revolution Iranian flags, while thanking US President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for the strikes that killed Iran's Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
We are only here to thank President Trump and Netanyahu for their help.
We're here because we support King Reza Pahlavi.
In Milan, some Iranian demonstrators backed the military action, said it was the only way to free what they called 90 million hostages living under the Islamic Republic. Support for the campaign was also visible in the US. Demonstrators in LA rallied in support of the US and Israeli military operation and called for a change in Iran's leadership, many waving the Iranian flag used before the 1979 revolution. But despite unity against the Islamic Republic, the anti-regime protesters remain divided on what comes next, with some chanting, "Long live the Shah," others chanting, "No Shah, no mullahs," and some of Iran's ethnic minorities split on what comes next if the regime falls. But not all protesters have backed the war. In London, around 4,000 people gathered outside the US Embassy to protest the bombing of Iran and Lebanon. The crowd included anti-war activists, pro-Palestinian groups, and some Iranian demonstrators, including both opponents and supporters of the current regime. Some of them supportive of Khamenei's assassination, but arguing that change should come from the Iranian people themselves.
We thank all the West for the support of Iranian uprising, but as a human being, everyone feeling that there is a bit sadness because there is a bloodshed, a lot of civilians dying.
So as the war enters its second week after the Supreme Leader's death, protests across the world show deep divisions, but also growing calls from many Iranians abroad for the Islamic Republic to fall.
Back to the wall publicly.
So for more, it's a pleasure now to welcome Giselle Sharmoud, spokesperson from the Kingdom Assembly of Iran and director at the Iran Desk International Freedom Coalition, joining us now from Los Angeles. Thank you so much, Giselle, for your time. Just a short while ago, a new development. It won't surprise many. It's not official, but it certainly seems that the Supreme Leader is going to be replaced, after all, by his son, Mojtaba, a top Iranian cleric, confirming as much just a short while ago, although, again, it isn't officially announced. What is your sense? What is your reaction to the name Mojtaba Khamenei? What more can you tell us?
Thank you for having me. And well, let's first clarify the majority of Iranian people hate this regime. It should be no surprise to anybody. They have killed the Iranians for 47 years, and especially after the January massacre, where tens of thousands were murdered by this regime, 300,000 were injured. You can understand that this pain, this blood that has been spilled by this regime is irreversible. So the Iranian people as a whole will never accept any remnants of this regime as their oppressors. That has to be clear, because the cliff between Iranians and this regime, this is not, Mojtaba is not an Iranian leader. He is part of the Arab Islamist occupation of Iran. That's why Iranians are saying we have 90 million hostages. That's why they're saying this regime must go. But let's explain real quick, Mojtaba or Larijani or anybody, any remnants of this regime cannot produce anything other than what it is. So that is Islamist and jihadist. On top of that, we have to understand that his father, as savage and horrible and terrifying and terrorizing that he was, his son, if the father had incentive to want to kill Iranians, to want to kill Americans, to want death on Israel. Imagine what his son is feeling right now after watching his father, his wife, his commanders-in-chief being blown to dust. So anybody from this regime is not a viable option to replace the leadership inside of Iran. That is as if we would kill Hitler and then have deals with the SS, with the Nazis. So this is the thought of it, entertaining even the thought of it is laughable to this mission. If this mission was actually taken effect to liberate Iran and the world from the biggest terrorist organization that we have ever seen.
Well, to that exact point, Donald Trump has already said that the next Iranian Supreme Leader is not going to last long without American approval. Israel has also made it clear that the next contender as leader of the regime as such would also be a target. So how do you see this unfolding in terms of this joint military operation underway as we speak?
The military operation has created so much hope for the Iranian people. For the first time after 47 years, they can witness how Israelis and Americans are actually taking out the demons that have killed Iranians, that have tortured Iranians, that are still doing that. The prisons is filled full of Iranians who are being tortured and murdered and lynched right now. So this is unimaginable for the Iranian people that they can even witness this moment that brings them so much closer to liberation. So again, anything that would signal to the people that there will be another regime, remnants of this regime in place, will not be accepted by the people. The people have shown that they will rise again and again. And even if it costs them their lives, they will take this regime out. So at this moment, to make sure that this mission is successful, we're already pounding the IRGC bases. We already took out their Navy, their Army, their everything. What is missing in this part is a sovereign power that we will then transfer the sovereignty of the state from these Ayatollah occupation to the Iranian people. And we're very lucky that this kind of transitional leadership is already in place. And what has to happen right now is not just continuing this mission, but strategizing with the transitional leadership of Iran, which is outside of Iran in exile and ready to lead this transition.
And to that point, very briefly, the sentiment right now about Reza Pahlavi, son of the Shah, given what you are describing as we speak.
Reza Pahlavi, or the crown prince, or the king, or whatever people feel for him, has one central role at this moment that was developed in 2025 in Munich. I was there. I was lucky enough to speak there with hundreds of others of representatives of the Iranian opposition, which endorsed the crown prince under 4 shared principles as a transitional leadership. So you can see the outcome of this coalition working was the uprising in January. So you can see that he is the only one that can mobilize millions in the streets of Iran all across the nation. He was able to mobilize thousands of Iranians, close to 1 million in all of the capitals of the world on February 14th. He is in place. He has a plan. We need somebody on the ground that works together with our forces to make sure that the transition is going to be smooth and it's not going to end up in either the regime regaining power or civil war or chaos or destruction. So the crown prince is ready, has been ready, is working together with a majority of the opposition from every spectrum, by the way. And this amounts to the time. The important point right now is recognition of the Iranian leadership and recognition of this transitional government in place and cooperation to make sure that this mission will not fail and will not be a failed regime change, but will lead to liberation like we saw during the Nazi era when we liberated Europe from Nazi occupation.
So appreciate hearing your reaction and your insight. Thank you for your time. Giselle Sharmad, live from Los Angeles. Thank you for being with us on this breaking news edition. Eitan Dangat, your reaction to exactly that.
Yeah, I would like to emphasize from the other side, the fact that the Iranians are very rapidly trying to put the son of Khamenei instead of his father, even it was published that he was wounded at the first attack on the residence of his father with the family, shows the pressure and the weakness that the Iranians are still there. They're afraid to lose the entity. And what does it show? They are taking him without even showing him and trying to put the name in order to show they are controlling the situation. In my opinion, it's a sign for weakness. Secondly, the statement of President Trump, and also, of course, in Israel, it's not the first time we are killing the successor of such a terrible guy like was his father, and his son is on the way. The Americans and the Israeli intelligence will be very close to him and try to targeting him the first moment. If it succeeds, the first time that I'm trying to estimate something for future, but if it succeed to do it in a very short time, it will be a second, let's say, opportunity to go to the streets because it's very symbolic to the Iranian. No chance that we will allow, the world, President Trump with Israel will allow to put someone who will be the same way treated these people.
As we just heard there from Giselle outlining, the reaction on the streets is going to be palpable. There's no doubt about it as soon as it is confirmed.
Right. Well, I mean, a couple points. First of all, I agree fully with what Eitan said. I think picking a leader based on heredity shows the weakness of the system, weakness of the institutions. Look at something like the Chinese Communist Party, Benita. They don't pick the children of because they have strong institutions that pick people based on merit. Of course, merit as they see it for their interests, which are obviously very different from maybe the interests of the public there. But in any case, institutions that are strong enough. And by the way, there are reports that Ali Khamenei himself didn't want his son to be picked, in a sense, for exactly this reason. One comment about Reza Pahlavi, there was one interesting point that our guest made that's very, very important to emphasize. You can't beat something with nothing, meaning those within the Iranian opposition who come out against Reza Pahlavi may or may not have good arguments, but even if they do, there isn't a sense that there's a real competitor for him, not a competitor in the sense of a concept, a competitor in the sense of a person, of a human being, of a leader, because by all accounts and experts on revolutions are saying that's what's ultimately going to be needed. And that's what the Trump administration and Trump personally is looking for, a human being, a person. So I think that those within the opposition who are opposed to Reza Pahlavi, the burden is on them to put someone forward, a person, not a concept.
It's certainly
not only a concept.
To be fascinating, and it certainly can't be the same ideology that existed before for the last 47 years. Gentlemen, stay with us. We've got so much more to discuss. Right now, though, a very quick break. When we get back, our coverage continues on this breaking news edition. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. Back in a bit.
Secret is out. With millions of younger-looking customers across the country, Plexiderm is one of the most sought-after anti-aging products available today. Influencers love it, magazines feature it, and people just can't get enough of it. As a matter of fact, Elle magazine gave it an Editor's Choice Award as Best Instant Wrinkle Filler for 2025. Plexiderm reduces the appearance of fine lines, wrinkles, and those dreaded under-eye bags in as little as 10 minutes. So yes, you can look years younger in minutes, and the effects will last for hours. No surgery, no gimmicks, just results.
Look at this one under-eye bag. It's gone.
I've tried it all, and then I found Plexiderm, and this happened.
The best news, in this super inflated economy, you can try Plexiderm for only $14.95 and free shipping. So don't wait. Just call the number on your screen.
Call 800-919-8734.
Iran has hit cities across Israel with a massive attack. There are rockets and drones that are hitting our schools, our homes, our synagogues. I'm Yael Eckstein of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, and we urgently need your response now to help bring emergency food, shelter, and life-saving supplies.
The International Fellowship of Christians and Jews has emergency teams across the front lines of Israel's war for survival. Call now to give your gift of $45 and help provide food, shelter, and life-saving supplies. It's your prayers and gifts that give hope and comfort to Israel and the Jewish people.
The Fellowship is a Bible-believing ministry, and we desperately need tens of thousands of faithful believers to answer this call for help now.
Call, scan, or go online now to stand with Israel.
Wherever you are, access our programmes, reports, in-depth discussions and expert analysis anytime, anywhere, right from your phone. All the content from the I24 News website, the latest articles, exclusive interviews, VOD and live broadcasts is now just a tap away on the I24 News app. So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News app today.
Welcome back to this breaking news edition. Our coverage continues as we continue with our focus on the war, the joint US-Israeli operations against the Iranian regime, and the response out of Tehran targeting oil-rich Gulf nations. The tension is rattling businesses worldwide, driving up energy prices, squeezing supplies of critical raw materials, and, of course, raising the question about the reliability of trade routes critical to the flow of goods. The widening conflict has choked major air and sea transport corridors through the Middle East. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, a conduit for 1/5 of the world's oil, slowed to a near halt amidst the Iranian retaliatory strikes, not to mention the impact on busy air transit routes in the Gulf. Meanwhile, two top U.S. envoys are heading to Israel. Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff are expected in the country this week. The top security brass in both countries have outlined major successes in their joint operations so far. Many questions remain around the strategy ahead. Senior correspondent Guy Azriel has this update.
Israel is racing to achieve as much as it can in its air campaign in Iran these days, when Israeli officials estimate it will take another 3 weeks to complete the entire bank of targets in Iran. And so the very fast pace of Israeli attacks from Israeli Air Force that we've seen in recent days is only going to accelerate. And the rationale behind that is the fear that at a certain stage, President Trump may eventually ask Israel to stop this operation. And so the thinking is trying to achieve as much as possible before that may happen. Of course, the statements that we've been hearing from President Trump do not suggest that he plans to put a stop to this operation anytime soon. And in this respect, we can also report that U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is expected to arrive in Israel later this week, together with Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. The two will coordinate the next moves in this war with the Israeli leadership. And also we can report that Israel is putting an effort not just on its offensive, but also in trying to persuade the Iranian people to go out to the streets. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu posting a video today with subtitles in Persian, asking the people to eventually go out to the streets and claim their freedom. And we can also report that there is some disappointment in Israel from the fact that we have yet to see any wave of protests since the start of this operation.
Thank you very much to our Guy Azriel. Now for more reaction, it's a pleasure to welcome Ariel Cohen, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and founder of International Market Analysis, joining us now from Washington. Ariel, thank you so much for your time. It's just 9 days in, and obviously the situation is disrupting one of the world's most important shipping routes. Oil prices are surging, and obviously it's higher prices for gas, and then the ripple effect on other costs. Your assessment, your insights right now.
First of all, let's put it in perspective. The oil prices are not historically high. I just looked up in 2022, in the post-COVID recovery, they were $104 then, which is probably $120-some in today's term. In 2014, in today's terms, it was $158. In 2008, it was $223 a barrel at the peak, and then it collapsed. So oil prices fluctuate. $87 of Brent and probably lower price of WTI, the Texas crude, is manageable, and historically it's more like $60. So in terms of inflation, a little bit of an uptick, not majorly. In terms of a longer term, depends how quickly the war is going on. If it's only another week or 2 or 3, the economy will manage. President Trump is looking at a very tough midterm elections in the United States. The last thing he needs is a spike in gasoline prices. He boasted in the State of the Union address that gasoline is around $3 a gallon. Now it's probably more like 350, 380, but it's still relatively cheap. And of course, it's much cheaper than in Israel or in Europe. However, we also now start to see that Israel is attacking some of the oil targets in Iran, the refineries. There's a speculation that Kharg Island, the terminal where 90% of the Iranian oil maybe is exporting, Kharg Island may be in play. And that sends a very severe message to Iran. Step down, capitulate, or at least comply with the conditions President Trump is offering you, or things will get much, much worse for Iran, because Iran 100% depends on its oil, and its oil depends 90% on Kharg Island.
What then are your concerns about the tension escalating across vast parts of the region? We're seeing the retaliation out of Iran targeting a whole range of oil-rich nations across the Gulf, and then watching from the sidelines all the developments. What does it all mean for Russia right now? Your thoughts and your insights.
First of all, it's not a retaliation. Arab countries in the Gulf did not attack Iran. In fact, they were going out of their way to tell President Trump and to the United States, do not escalate, do not attack Iran. They were afraid. They were afraid exactly of what happened now, when their hotels, their civilians, their airports, that Dubai, for example, depends on tourism, are under bombardment by the nastiest Iranian ballistic missiles. So when these countries, especially Qatar, were supporting Hamas, and Hamas was attacking Israeli civilians, how does it feel, Qatar, when the shoe is on the other foot? In the long term, the Arab Gulf monarchies understand that the Shia totalitarian theocracy in Iran is not sustainable. They need to get rid of it. They need to play ball with Israel, with the United States and others, to enact regime change in Iran. And lastly, Iran is not only attacking the Gulf states, it's attacking Azerbaijan. It shot a missile into Turkey and against Cyprus. So in terms of Russia, Russia benefits from an increase in oil prices, the market demand going up, including for Russian oil. But in the long run, Russia lost face, because Russia has this strategic agreement on security cooperation with Iran, and it didn't do very much to support the Mullah regime. It lost major systems that they sold, S-300 anti-aircraft systems, S-400 according to some reports, radars, and other military technology. And Russia, with North Korea, participated in development of the ballistic missiles of Iran since 1990s. I have receipts. We have it documented. They provided this technology, and the United States and Israel are shooting down Russian missiles, destroying Russian SAMs, anti-aircraft batteries. So it's a huge loss of face for Russia, which is understandable. They are up to the eyeballs in the Ukraine war, which is also a huge strategic miscalculation.
That certainly is very true. They have enough on their plate. And again, so many in the region trying to make sense of why, through the regime of Iran's eyes, they feel it necessary to be targeting these civilian sites, as you say, including airports, hotels, and so many global business destinations, no doubt all going to impact how things look down the line. Ariel Cohen, as always, appreciate your insights. No doubt this conversation will continue in the coming weeks. Be well.
Thank you.
And now, I know our senior correspondent, Owen Alterman, wants to comment.
Right, a few comments. First of all, the U.S. seems to have two strategies for dealing with the oil, and we heard some reference to both of them. Number one, to clear the Strait of Hormuz. We heard Energy Secretary Chris Wright talk about that earlier today on the Sunday shows in the United States. basically saying, Nita, that even Iran's asymmetric capability to clear the Strait of Hormuz, he thinks can be handled. He talked about a tanker that did make its way through the Strait of Hormuz, albeit one tanker, not the dozens that go through there every day in the normal course. But again, generating some optimism that can be taken care of. And the second thing, which we've also seen from the United States, and you referred to it in your question to the guest, allowing Russian oil to flow more freely. We saw the waiver given to India for 30 days to buy Russian oil. Of course, that has knock-on effects in the Ukraine war. And the Israeli public, I think, doesn't understand the American mindset. We think of different fronts as Iran and Lebanon and Yemen, but the United States has a much wider purview, having to look at how the Iranian front affects not just those, but also Russia and China and here. In order to stop Iran, are you, in a sense, helping Russia and giving it an all-important advantage in Ukraine? And finally, an issue at the historical price of oil. Your guest is absolutely right. Historically, these prices aren't high, but for the American voter in Middle America, they're not comparing the price of gasoline to what it was inflation adjusted in 2008. They're comparing it to what it was 2 weeks ago. And this is already in a climate where the affordability issue and the cost of living issue is central to American politics. So again, there's extra sensitivity, I suspect, for this for Trump, which is why we don't have a diplomatic hourglass in this case for Israel, but we do have an hourglass and a stopwatch starting to tick backwards in terms of the impact in U.S. politics and U.S. public opinion.
No leader wants their electorate worrying about the cost of living at crucial times on the political calendar. Owen Alterman, thank you so much. We turn now back to our coverage on developments on the ground, and we go to Tel Aviv. 6 people have been wounded by shrapnel following an Iranian attack with a suspected cluster warhead missile launched at the center of the country earlier on Sunday, one of a spate of attacks on this day, sending millions of Israelis to shelters once again. Correspondent Joe Brown was in Tel Aviv and filed this update.
Iran is increasing its use of cluster munitions fired towards Israel. These are missiles that just before they impact, they break away into several little bomblets which are able to make an impact over a greater area. And this is what we saw earlier today in central Israel, with some of these cluster munitions landing in Bnei Brak, Petach Tikva, and right behind me in Tel Aviv. In fact, one of the missiles that landed was outside the house of the mother of Yair Lapid, the former Israeli prime minister and current leader of the opposition. After he went and spoke to his mother, he came to this site here, where I asked him whether Israel should be worried about the increase of cluster munitions fired by Iran.
Well, you know what? The next piece of this cluster, this is the same cluster, fell next to my mom's house. She's 91 years old. So, of course, I called her and said, Mama, you okay? She said, I'm fine. I'm not afraid of them. I understand this war and we should go on. So here's the message from a 91-year-old woman who's been through everything. The people of Israel, yes, it's a threat. Yes, these cluster bombs are horrible. We're going to stand united opposite this. It's the same way we were standing united opposite all threats. And they're not going to frighten us. We know we are fighting a just war, and we know we have the capability of achieving the war's goals, which is the nuclear program, the ballistic missile program, and make it possible for the people of Iran to change this horrible regime that took over their lives.
Whilst the cluster bombs do spread further than some of the missiles that we've seen over the last week, they don't have as big of an impact as we saw the massive craters in Tel Aviv, Beersheba, and Beit Shemesh. These missiles are much more localized. They don't destroy streets as they did in those other cities. These just impacted specific houses or buildings that are directly in front of it. But regardless, there is still a lot of cleaning up to do, as you can see behind me. The excavator has just arrived. Earlier, I spoke to Dean Elsden. He is a police spokesperson, and he told me the next steps that they have to do to clear up and to make the area safer for the people living in it.
So the initial steps are our first responders arrive, our patrol units, we get the dispatch call, we come to the scene, and we arrive to the scene just like this. Then comes our bomb squads, who neutralize any dangerous fragments left over from the missiles. Sometimes they're unexploded, and they could be very dangerous. And then, of course, the first responders go in, they check to make sure that nobody is inside of the house, nobody needs our assistance, not just at this location, but we go to the surrounding buildings as well, where you can see some of the windows that are blown out. We want to make sure that nobody needs medical attention. And then the other cleanup crews start coming in, start removing some of this debris. The Home Front Command goes inside, and together we're working with all the security agencies to make sure that it's as quick as possible so our civilians can continue with their life.
The person who lived in that building was safe as they managed to get to a shelter in time. However, they are being treated for anxiety. In total, 6 people were injured in these attacks, one person being seriously wounded. Now, this was the first hit in central Israel, the first impact at all since last Tuesday, in which similar cluster munitions were utilized in Bnei Brak and the surrounding areas. So far, though, it's been a week since there's been a deadly missile impact, since only around about 3% make it through the Israeli air defense systems. However, people still need to be vigilant because all it takes is one missile, and especially with these cluster munitions, which are being used a lot more by Iran, they can spread quite a distance.
Correspondent Joe Brown in Tel Aviv. And now for more, Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangot. So another Iranian attempt. This cluster warhead splitting up, causing enormous damage. Several people wounded as well. And at the same time, Hezbollah still has the capabilities to launch from southern Lebanon towards Israeli cities. Your take on the threat that exists right now for Israelis as we speak?
First of all, I want to mention that if you are looking about the development during the days, the offensive activity against the missile area or units has a lot of achievements. The fact is that from day to day, you see difficulties from the Iranian to launch many missiles. They are doing it one after the other, but very individual. We cannot say numbers here, but we see that this kind of achievements have a very close and straight impact on their capacities how to do it. Secondly, the Israeli public discipline about how to behave. The instruction from the Home Front Command is very important to keep it during the day. And if you ask me concerning which threat was going inside Tehran against the regime compared to the Israeli population, and we pay a very painful price in Bet Shemesh, but if you're looking about all, I think that we shows very strong way, fulfill the instructions, fulfill the orders. On the other end, what you mentioned with Lebanon is for us, let's say, we have to be very sensitive to what's going with Lebanon because Hezbollah demonstrate their capacity by launching for the short range, medium range. They have thousands of rockets yet in their arsenal. And I think that the population at the north that are not leaving their homes, but staying brave and a part of this kind of a war are paying a very sensitive price because they are attacking one after the other, many alerts, many sirens, and we have to pay attention. According to all Lebanon, we just mentioned 14 Israeli soldiers has been wounded in the last 72 hours with, unfortunately, 2 soldiers the death, and I would like to pass my sorrows to the families. It means that in Lebanon, the story, Hezbollah is very weak, but we have to be very calculating in our offensive war. What does it mean? The Israeli policy has to decide with the IDF together, commanders, whether we are going to offensive and ground activities, or we are waiting to, first of all, to the results in Iran, and also making some offensive by making fire inside the depths of Lebanon, in Beirut area, in the Bekaa, but on the south of Lebanon, by maneuvering, we have to be, I think, to wait to the results in Iran because their impact very strong. But the main mission, without saying it, the 2 minds of, you can translate it, we have to defend our population. And in my opinion, we will see in the coming days maneuvering of the Armed Ground Command inside Lebanon, but in a way that we can involve with it a political solution as well.
Talking about some kind of a solution, efforts for some kind of diplomacy, French President Emmanuel Macron is urging Iran to stop strikes. He made a phone call to his Iranian counterpart, Masoud Pezeshkian. He also obviously wants to free up the Strait of Hormuz, as we were discussing earlier on in the show. Owen Alterman, senior correspondent, your thoughts on these efforts right now and the timing?
Right. We'll start with the text of Macron's readout of the conversation, Benita. He essentially says two things. Iran must, first of all, Iran needs to return French nationals in Iran, but it's for the issues at play in this war. Iran needs to immediately cease strikes against neighboring countries, against the Gulf states, so immediately cease. And then Iran must also guarantee freedom of navigation by ending the de facto closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Those are the two things that Iran needs to do, one immediately and one, in a sense, immediately. Beyond that, Macron talks about deep concern for Iran's nuclear program, ballistic missile program, and proxies.
Is he deeply concerned now?
Deeply concerned, aren't we all? Deeply concerned with those. And there needs to be a diplomatic solution to deal with these issues, and they'll stay in touch. Translation to plain English, Benita, two preconditions. Stop the attacks in the Gulf states, open the Strait of Hormuz, and then the rest of it we can talk about. And lo and behold, who better to talk about it with than me, because we're going to stay in touch. Macron, I think, here is throwing his hat in the ring to be a mediator and be a mediator between the United States and Iran. And we can understand why the French president, particularly this French president, always likes to show how important France is in the international arena, and particularly the Middle East. But the bad news for Emmanuel Macron, Benita, is I doubt that Donald Trump will pick him as the mediator. We know the rivalry that Trump feels with Europe, especially diplomatically. I suspect that if and when Donald Trump is interested in a mediator, there's no interest at this point because Trump thinks he has more to gain by continuing to fight than by moving towards talks. But if and when that changes, I suspect Trump will look for a different mediator that's not on the European continent.
Talking about Trump's and discussions with leaders, UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed speaking to the US leader on the phone. Much to discuss, no doubt about that. Ariel, what are you learning?
Yeah, they talked about regional developments and also discussed the ongoing Iranian attacks on the UAE and countries in the region. Now, according to the Emirati news agency, state news agency WAM, in their conversation on the Iranian drone attacks, they discussed their implications for regional and international security and stability, showing that really, the UAE is the country that has been the hardest hit in these Iranian attacks, pretty much more than all the other countries combined, and that includes Israel. And so this is a very important conversation happening shortly after there was the emergency session of the Arab League. And so here we're seeing President Trump keeping close tabs on what's happening in the region while maintaining close coordination with the key ally, the UAE.
May I add some remark about Macron? Too little and also too late. Sitting in the gallery and watching what's going inside the stadium shows about, in my opinion, the way France is handling since the beginning of the war with Israel, the fact that France didn't make these words concerning supporting what the West are looking and see this kind of terrorism of this regime. And what he did, he was very quick to stop the Israeli defense industry not to be a part of his activities in the last Paris show in the summer. I think it's a game, or is fulfill a job that is just you have to smile and say, it's for us much so better that we are not close to you as it was in the past.
Listen, after razzing Macron, I'm going to jump slightly to his defense. The reality is Macron lives in Paris. He doesn't live in Tel Aviv or Petah Tikva or Kiryat Shmona or any of the places that are under attack. He looks at the world through French eyes. France doesn't have the kind of stake in this fight that we do. That's simply the reality. That said, I think there are more effective and more realistic ways for France to promote its interests. He's going to Cyprus, and that's a wonderful thing for France to do, to protect Europe and to project France's influence within the European Union in a country that's been attacked, and to send some military assets. That makes a lot more sense than to have this vain attempt to try to be a mediator.
We've got 1 minute until the break. Eitan Dangot, your sense of Israel's ability to handle threats on all fronts at the same time. Very briefly, please, how confident are you?
I think that we are on a way to, if you mean between Israel and France? I didn't hear your question.
All fronts, on all fronts. Hezbollah, Iran.
I think that we are in a very good way with Iran. We need time. We need on the timetable. But on the other end, I have on the side a very important looking towards Lebanon. Lebanon has become much more complicated than at the beginning of this war, and we have to be very careful and calculating.
For now, we will leave France out as a threat. But we always appreciate you being here in studio. Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangot, thank you very much, as always. Owen and Ariel, you're going to stay with us through the break. Thank you so much. Right now, a very short break, but when we get back, our coverage continues on this Breaking News edition. Stay tuned. Back again in just 2 minutes.